Chapter 11. Ray had never felt closer to death in his life. He had thrown up several times on the tarmac, but didn't have the strength to move his head from the stinking mess. His vision was blurred so badly that he couldn't make out if the people lying next to him were dead or alive. A man with a red beard moved awkwardly into his field of vision. Ray tried to focus. The man took several steps and then fell to his knees. Ray's head pounded. The dry heaving began. Ray was drowning in his own slim. "Oh, fuck. I wish I was dead." Skip rolled Ray over on his side. He put his fingers in Ray's mouth, removing chunks of vomit. Skip heard crying but didn't have the energy to crawl over to the pregnant girl. "Are you all right?" he called out. The girl sat up and continued to sob loudly. Skip stood up. He took a step and fell on top of Ray and blacked out. The heat felt unbearable as the sun blazed in the afternoon sky. The pressure of an index finger on his neck caused Ray to open his eyes once again. He could see a tattoo of a blue dagger with a drop of faded red blood dripping from the tip. It brought back a memory. Ray tried to recall where he had seen it before, but his brain was too foggy. The man drug Ray under a shade tree and then returned to Skip. With a little help from the tattooed man, Skip made his way out of the sun and sat in the shade. The pregnant girl joined Skip and Ray under the trees. Skip heard a weary voice cry out. He crawled over to investigate. "Can anybody help me with Darren?" Skip recalled seeing the hippie girl and a few other drug addicts come and go when he patrolled the area near his Greengate campsite. Darren was gray, motionless, and lay curled up in a ball. He was not breathing. Skip knew the young man was dead, but he pretended to administer aid for the sake of the wide-eyed girl who was sitting next to him. The girl kept repeating, "You'll be all right, baby. You'll be all right." After at least the 10th time repeating the phrase, she stood up and wobbly walked over to the shade. She fell unconscious to the ground. Ed Olson had been the first person to wake up. He had a hard time believing his eyes. There were people lined up lying next to him on what appeared to be a runway. He looked around to see if any aircraft were in sight. There were no airplanes, no control tower, nothing but jungle. Right away, he recognized Keisha, but the other people were unknown to him. The old woman who was next to him began thrashing and kicking her legs. She appeared to be naked except for the partially charred blanket that was wrapped around her. The rancid odor that emanated from the blanket motivated Ed to move away from the group. He spotted a wooden crate a few yards down the runway. He found it contained a small hatchet, some carrots and apples, and a few books of matches. Ed could hear the ocean not far away. He dragged the crate along a muddy trail that soon opened up to a sandy beach. It wasn't hard to find a good hiding place. Ed hid the crate near the edge of the jungle and covered it with foliage. When Ed returned to the runway, the old lady had wandered off, leaving the blanket behind. In the daylight, Keisha's beauty was more evident than Ed had remembered from the night before. Her bronze skin seemed to glow in the sunlight. Even with smeared makeup and drool dripping from her mouth, Ed found her mesmerizing. He reached over and unbuttoned her top. He lifted her bra and began fondling and kissing her breast. Ed soon pulled out his phone and began taking pictures. His fun came to a halt when he heard the moans of people beginning to wake up. He headed back into the jungle to search for a suitable place to look at the pictures. Keisha regained consciousness. She felt moisture on the nipples of her exposed breast. Vaguely, she remembered what had happened. It seemed like a dream. She stumbled over to Lil Nate and removed the gun from his waistband. Keisha heard the moans of people lying on the runway, but didn't stop to offer aid. Keisha could hear Ed stomping down the trail, stepping on twigs and kicking rocks as he went. She followed and watched as he stepped behind a Mexican palm tree. He removed the phone from his pocket and began fondling himself. When she discovered what he was up to, she had the inclination to shoot the fool. She thought better of it and found a hollowed-out section in a tree to hide the gun. Lil Nate crawled on his hands and knees until he was off of the hot tarmac. Keisha returned from the jungle and sat next to him. "Where the hell are we?" he asked in a groggy voice. "Don't know," Keisha responded. Skip had seen it before, the shaking, the sweating, and all the other symptoms of alcohol withdrawal. Ray was in awful shape. "Él necesita agua," Victor Morales, the man with the dagger tattoo, said. Skip looked up and nodded in agreement. The two men walked in the direction of what appeared to be a clearing behind the landing strip. The first thing Skip noticed was an enormous pile of debris. pieces of discarded plywood, twisted metal, and broken plumbing fixtures. They were the leftover remnants of buildings that were once the island's primary structures. Skip's first thoughts were that they were at an abandoned military base. He reasoned that if the island was once inhabited, there must be water nearby. He and Morales searched the property but found no sign of water. Skip tried to explain that perhaps previous inhabitants had the water shipped in. Victor Morales spoke little English, but he seemed to understand what Skip was trying to say. Skip carefully studied the cracked concrete foundation slabs. There were drains leading out, but no water pipes leading in. They found water at the bottom of an old swimming pool. It was a sickly shade of green, and mosquitoes hovered all around. The two men followed a path that led away from the swimming pool. In the clearing, they saw the remains of an old golf course. Next to the third hole was a dried-up pond with dirty golf balls and a broken driver embedded in the clay. Morales looked at Skip with an expression of astonishment on his face. Skip was confused. The Mexican pointed to a water fountain next to the trail. It was leaking and feeding the thick weeds below it. Morales ran over and began drinking water from the clogged-up holding bowl. He twisted the knob on the fountainhead, and a small stream of water dribbled out. Skip ran over and also began licking the lukewarm fluid from the fountain. They returned to the pile of debris, hoping to find a container to transport water back to the people on the landing strip. It took almost an hour, and the large styrofoam cup wasn't half full. Skip rushed it back to the airfield, resisting the urge to take a gulp for himself. Ray's tremors had gotten worse. Skip poured the water into Ray's mouth. A lot of it leaked down the side of his face. "You'll just be wasting your time. He won't last a day out here." Skip continued trying to get Ray to drink the water. He didn't listen to the young man wearing fancy shoes and a gold chain. "I'm telling you, man, that dude's a goner." Skip paid no attention. His water cup was empty, and he headed back to the golf course. The pregnant girl, Keisha, and Lil Nate followed him. When they neared the swimming pool, they heard the shrill sound of insane laughter. A naked old woman was in the pool splashing and slipping about in the green, slimy water. Victor Morales had just about filled the beer can when Lil Nate rushed up and yanked the can from his hand. With one big gulp, the pimp drained it. Morales grabbed Nate by the neck and lifted him off the ground. The young black man's legs kicked as he instinctively reached for the gun that was no longer in his waistband. Skip charged forward, banging Victor's arm. Lil Nate fell to the ground. "What the fuck? I just wanted a drink." Neither Skip nor Morales responded. Ed walked along the shore until he reached a rocky point that was about a mile from the landing strip. He threw the apple core into the crashing waves. He spotted the cave about 100 yards ahead. The sun was setting, so he decided the cave would be a good place to spend the night. It surprised his to see empty beer cans and champagne bottles littering the area near the fire ring. He examined one of the bottles and thought to himself, "Someone has pretty expensive taste." Ed was holding an empty bottle of Dom Perignon, 1966. There were a few half-burned chunks of wood in the fire ring and a couple of chopped logs off to the side. Using the matches he had removed from the crate, Ed had a respectable fire going before the darkness set in. He saw something at the back of the cave that caught his attention. A few pearls glowed from the top of a mound of sand. He swiped away the sand to discover that the pearls were part of a buried necklace. When he pulled on the strand, a gruesome sight greeted him. The shriveled remains of a small child's head popped forward. Ed released the pearls and quickly reburied the corpse.